The flight attendant's hand closed around my wrist with surprising gentleness, pulling me away from my seat toward the galley as the plane cruised at 30,000 feet. I can see the fear in your eyes, the same one I had when I was hiding who I really was, he whispered, his blue eyes locking onto mine with a kindness that hit me like a wave, and in that moment his decision to pull me aside turned an ordinary flight into the one that would redefine who I was. I stood frozen between the drink cart and the emergency door, heart hammering so loud I was sure the whole cabin could hear it. His name tag read Liam Brooks, and he looked every bit the seasoned professional in his Navy uniform. Dark hair neatly trimmed, shoulders broad from years of lifting luggage and calming nervous flyers. I was Jake Harlan, 28, a graphic designer from Chicago heading to Los Angeles for a client pitch that suddenly felt irrelevant. The truth I'd buried for a decade was clawing its way up my throat, and this stranger had just yanked the lid off the box. "Sir, are you okay?" a woman in 14C called out, peering over her magazine. Liam smiled at her with practiced calm. "Just helping a passenger with motion sickness, ma'am. We're good." He guided me deeper into the galley, out of sight, and poured me a cup of water without asking. "Breathe. I'm not here to out you." I just recognized the look. 10 years ago, I was you, pretending, smiling for family photos, dating girls, because it was easier than explaining. I took the cup with shaking hands. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, and for once the jolt outside matched the one inside me. "How did you know?" I asked, voice barely above the engine hum. Liam leaned against the counter, arms crossed, voice low and steady. "The way you stared at the couple too rose up, the two guys holding hands. Most straight men don't freeze like that. In your eyes, they're tired, Jake. I read your boarding pass when I checked IDs. Look, I've got 3 hours before we land. If you want to talk, I'm here. If not, I'll walk you back and we never speak again." Something in his tone, honest, no pity, made the words tumble out. I told him about growing up in small-town Illinois, Sunday dinners where my dad preached real men provide for a wife and kids, the college boyfriend I never introduced to anyone, the panic attacks I blamed on work stress. Liam listened without interrupting, nodding like every sentence made perfect sense. Between serving drinks and answering call buttons, he shared pieces of his own story. Coming out to his sister first, the year his Texas parents stopped speaking to him, the slow rebuild when his mom finally showed up at his apartment with a casserole and tears. By the time the seatbelt sign dinged for descent, my shoulders felt lighter than they had in years. Liam slipped me a folded napkin with his number. "No pressure. Just know you're not the only one carrying this. Text if you want coffee in LA. Or don't. Either way, you survived the flight, and that's a start." I clutched the napkin the whole landing. When the wheels touched down at LAX, the California sun poured through the windows like a promise I wasn't sure I deserved. 3 days later, I was sitting in a sidewalk cafe in West Hollywood, staring at my phone. The client meeting had gone well, but my mind kept replaying the galley conversation on loop. I typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, I hit send. "Coffee still on the table?" "Jake from Flight 472. Liam answered in under 2 minutes. "Same table, different city. Meet me at Groundwork on Santa Monica in an hour." I almost backed out. The drive through traffic gave me too much time to second guess. What if he thought I was desperate? What if this was pity? But when I walked up and saw him in civilian clothes, jeans, white t-shirt, easy smile, I felt the same calm he'd given me at 30,000 feet. We talked for 4 hours. He told me about his route schedule, the crew friends who knew he was gay, and the ones that didn't. The way flying gave him perspective on how small problems look from the air. I told him about the promotion I'd turned down because it meant moving back near my parents, about the ex whose name I still couldn't say out loud without my stomach twisting. Somewhere between the second latte and the sunset, our knees brushed under the table and neither of us moved away. Over the next 2 weeks, we fell into a rhythm that felt both brand new and strangely familiar. Morning texts, late-night calls between his layovers, a hike in Griffith Park where he pointed out the city lights and said, "From up here, everything looks possible." He never pushed. When I froze the first time he reached for my hand, he simply squeezed once and let go, giving me space I hadn't known I needed. Then came a call from my mom. "Your cousin's wedding is next month, Jake. You bringing anyone? We'd love to meet her." The word "her" landed like a punch. I mumbled something about work and hung up, chest tight. Liam listened on speakerphone while I paced my hotel room. "You don't have to decide today," he said quietly. "But you also don't have to keep lying forever." That night, I dreamed of the galley again. Only this time the plane was empty except for us, and Liam's hand on my wrist felt like an anchor instead of a lifeline. When I woke, I texted him one line: "I think I'm ready to stop running." The return flight to Chicago felt different. Liam wasn't on it, but his voice stayed in my head. I promised myself I'd tell my parents the next time I saw them. The next time turned out to be sooner than expected: my dad's birthday barbecue 2 weeks later. I drove the familiar 2 hours to our small town, with Liam's last text glowing on the dash: "You've got this. Call after if you need me." The backyard smelled like charcoal and cut grass, same as every summer of my childhood. Mom hugged me tight. Dad clapped my shoulder and handed me a beer. Cousins asked the usual questions about any special girl. I smiled through it until my aunt pulled out her phone and showed me a photo from my Instagram. Liam and me at the Hollywood sign, arms around each other's shoulders. "Who's the handsome guy?" she asked, loud enough for the whole deck to hear. The silence that followed was louder than any turbulence. My dad set his plate down slowly. "Jake, you want to explain?" I looked at their faces, expectant, confused, already bracing for something they didn't want to hear, and the words I'd rehearsed for years came out shaky but true. "His name is Liam. We're together. I'm gay." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's jaw tightened the way it did before he used to yell at me for skipping football practice. My cousin muttered something under his breath. The next hour was a blur of questions, tears, and the kind of quiet that feels heavier than shouting. Mom asked if it was a phase. Dad wanted to know what he'd done wrong. I answered everything I could, voice cracking until I couldn't anymore. I left before dessert, driving back to Chicago with the radio off and my phone on silent. Liam called at midnight. I answered on the first ring. "They didn't kick you out," he reminded me gently. "That's something. The rest, it takes time." But time felt like a luxury I no longer had. The family group chat went silent. My sister texted privately that Mom had cried all night. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if one honest conversation had just cost me the only home I'd ever known. Work became my refuge until it didn't. My boss called me into his office on a Tuesday and closed the door. "Jake, there's been talk. Some clients saw your social media. They're concerned about the company image." I sat there stunned while he suggested I tone it down for the next pitch. I thought about the years I'd spent proving myself, the late nights, the awards. None of it mattered the moment my truth became visible. That same week, my childhood best friend Mark texted, "Dude, your family's freaking out. What's going on?" I met him for beers, hoping for support. Instead, he said, "Look, I love you, man, but your dad's my boss. If this affects the company picnic, the betrayal stung worse than the family silence." I walked out before he finished his sentence. Liam flew in on his next layover. He found me on the couch, surrounded by takeout boxes and half-finished storyboards. Without a word, he sat beside me, pulled me against his chest, and let me shake. "You're allowed to be angry," he murmured into my hair. "You're allowed to grieve the version of you they wanted." We spent the weekend rebuilding. He cooked, I sketched, we talked until the sky turned pink. He told me about the crew member who'd been fired years ago for the same reason and how the union had fought back. "Change is slow," he said, "but it happens because people like us stop hiding." By Sunday, I felt steadier. I posted a simple photo of Liam and me at Navy Pier with the caption, "Grateful for the man who reminds me it's okay to be exactly who I am." The likes from strangers poured in. The silence from home remained. The real test came in October when my mom called. "Your father's in the hospital. Nothing life-threatening, just tests. He asked if you'd come." I booked the flight before doubt could stop me. Liam offered to fly standby and meet me there. I told him no. This was something I had to do alone. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Dad looked smaller in the bed, monitors beeping softly. Mom waited outside the room, eyes red. When I stepped inside, Dad didn't look away. "Jake, he said, voice rough. I've been thinking. Maybe I didn't listen well enough. We talked for an hour. Halting, awkward, real. He admitted he was scared for me, scared of what the town would say. I told him I was scared too, but living a lie had almost killed me. When I mentioned Liam's name, Dad nodded slowly. Bring him for Thanksgiving, he said. If he's important to you, he's important to us. I left the room, shaking with relief and exhaustion. Mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. But the victory felt fragile. On the drive home, Liam called, and I told him everything. His voice cracked with pride. You did the hardest part. 2 weeks later, Liam's airline announced route changes that would keep him based in LA for the next year. He asked if I consider moving. The thought of leaving Chicago, my job, my friends, the life I'd built around hiding, terrified me. But so did the idea of another year of weekend flights and long-distance longing. I stood on my balcony overlooking the river and realized the man who'd pulled me aside in that galley had given me the courage to choose myself. Thanksgiving arrived cold and bright. I drove to the house with Liam beside me, his hand warm on my knee the whole way. The table was set the same as always, but the atmosphere felt different, tentative, hopeful. Dad shook Liam's hand first. Mom hugged him like she'd known him for years. My sister cracked jokes that actually landed. There were still awkward pauses, questions that made me flinch, but there was also laughter and second helpings of pie. Later, on the back porch under string lights, Liam pulled me close. You did this, he said quietly. You faced everything and chose us. I looked at the man who'd risked his own comfort to reach across an airplane aisle, and I understood that his decision that day hadn't just changed my flight. It had changed my entire future. We flew back to LA together 2 days later. I'd given notice at my job. A small design studio in West Hollywood had already offered me a position. As the plane climbed through the clouds, I rested my head on Liam's shoulder and smiled at the galley door. The flight attendant walking past gave us a knowing nod. Life wasn't perfect. Family text still carried careful wording sometimes. Work colleagues still raised eyebrows. But every morning I woke up next to the man who saw me when I couldn't see myself, and every night I fell asleep knowing I was finally, completely home. True or false? Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is let a stranger pull him aside and believe that one honest conversation can rewrite the rest of his life.